Kraven the Hunter is the final nail in Sony's Spider-Man universe, which never actually featured Spider-Man. Hey there guys, let's talk about Kraven the Hunter because I've been craving a terrible comic book movie to talk about. And with the release of Madam Web and Morbius, and the fact that this movie was delayed for almost a year, it was supposed to come out last January, I didn't have high expectations for Kraven the Hunter. I actually had no expectations at all. But what I got was so much more. Kraven the Hunter might be the most unintentionally hilarious movie of the year if you just give yourself to it. Do you want to know the reason Sony released the first 8 minutes of this movie online in a last-ditch effort attempt to market this film? It's because those 8 minutes are the best 8 minutes of this film, and it progressively gets worse from there. Because in those first 8 minutes, you see Kraven the Hunter escaping from a prison. It sort of felt like the poor man's version of the prison escape scene in Ghost Protocol, where Tom Cruise escapes a Russian prison. So what is the plot to this movie? Well, Kraven's complex relationship with his father, Nikolai Kravenov, starts him down a path of vengeance, with brutal consequences motivating him to become not only the greatest hunter in the world, but also the most feared. Throughout the years, we've had some great origin stories go down in comic book flicks like this right here or this right here. The origin story for Kraven the Hunter is one of the flattest, most convoluted origin stories I've ever witnessed up on the big screen. Do you guys want to talk about it? Well, I don't, but for the sake of the video, we have to. But first, welcome to my living room because I want to talk about the Sony Theater Bar 8 with 11 speakers, Dolby Atmos, and DTS-X. With this soundbar, you can bring the theater experience home because there's nothing better than eating popcorn in your underwear while you watch a great movie. The Theater Bar 8 features 360 spatial sound mapping, which gives you the cinema-style surround sound. The sound is auto-calibrated to your room's characteristics with sound field optimization. It also supports industry-standard audio formats including Dolby Atmos, DTS-X, and IMAX Enhanced. And right now, you can get $200 off by using the link down below. So if you want more info or want to pick one up for yourself, check out the link down below and save $200 off right now. It just occurred to me that Kraven the Hunter is a Sony movie, and I just promoted a Sony soundbar, except the soundbar is a million times better than this movie. And in all seriousness, if you guys want to help out my channel, just by clicking that link down below to check out the soundbar, that's all you have to do. That immensely helps out my channel. You don't even have to buy anything if you don't want to. Just check out the link down below. Thanks guys, let's get back to the review. Kraven and his brother unwillingly go on this hunting trip with their very emotionally abusive father, and by the way, there's sort of like a Menendez brothers vibe going on with this trio, but we'll get to that in just a few seconds. And the kid that they cast to play the teenage version of Kraven the Hunter, because it's a flashback sequence, looks nothing like Aaron Taylor Johnson, and he acts nothing like Aaron Taylor Johnson, but we'll get to that in just a few more seconds as well. At one point, when they see this line that they're hunting, Kraven says men shouldn't use weapons to hunt beasts. They should use their hands. And because of that, he's almost murdered and then he's carried away by the lion. And by the end of this series of unfortunate events, Kraven the Hunter is fatally wounded, and at one point there's a slow motion shot of the lion looking down at him, and the lion's blood slow-mo drips into his gaping wound. And then, some girl whose grandmother is a witch voodoo doctor walks by with magic juice in a little vial and pours it into Kraven's wound, and that's the origin story of Kraven the Hunter. Compelling shit! And the reason I had to share that origin story with you is, in the next scene you catch up to modern day Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven the Hunter, where he's essentially Superman of the wild. Nothing can hurt him. He is good at everything, and if he puts you on the list, he never takes you off the list. He comes across like a Jason Statham hitman assassin wannabe who lives in a treehouse and wants to hunt people because he has daddy issues. Much like every superpowered character in this film, their powers are never defined or explained because throughout this film, Kraven is invincible. At one point, 500 million tons of boulders fall on his body, and then he just gets up and goes. To expand on that point further, there's a sequence in this film where Kraven gets in a fight with a leopard out in the wilderness, and he's clawing and scratching and rolling around in the dirt with this animal, and by the end of this sequence, Kraven just stands up with this crisp, clean white t-shirt on. It doesn't even have a wrinkle or a speck of dirt on it, and I'm not quite sure if one of his superpowers are he wears stain-resistant t-shirts no matter what happens, but I just thought to myself, this is a $100 million movie, and they couldn't even get the props guy to throw some dirt on his white t-shirt. And it's just little things like that that eat me alive. There's no excuse for that lack of detail, but then again, whenever you have a script that's generated by ChatGPT and you have a movie that looks like it belongs in 2004, what do you expect? But let's keep talking about it. Here's the last thing I want to say about the character of Kraven the Hunter in this film, or lack thereof. When it comes to Aaron Taylor Johnson, I like him as an actor. I've seen him in some great performances, and I quite enjoyed him in Kick-Ass, which was a much better comic book film than Kraven the Hunter. But when it comes to Kraven's character in this film, the best way I can describe him is he sort of feels like a D-rate version of Jason Bourne meets a D-rate version of the Wolverine, and they combine both of those things in a really shitty movie. Now let's talk about Russell Crowe's character, Nikolai Kravinoff, aka Kraven's daddy. From the bottom of my heart, I mean this when I say it. I truly believe Russell Crowe is a phenomenal actor, and he stars in one of my favorite films of all time, Gladiator. When he played Maximus Decimus Meridius, it made me feel something, and ever since watching that film for the first time, back in 2000, I've always enjoyed Russell Crowe. Even when he's in a bad film, I still enjoy him. Except for this movie. Now let me explain what I'm talking about. In this film, his character is the most one-note, one-dimensional character I've ever witnessed up on the big screen. His entire mentality sort of reminded me of John Kreese from Cobra Kai. You're weak like your mother. You must pull the trigger to be strong like me. That's it. That's his entire personality. Except he reiterates that same line in 40 different variations throughout the 2-hour runtime of this film. And oh yeah, he hates his kids. But speaking of Kraven's family, the weirdest part of this film is his brother Dimitri. And he also played one of the emperors in Gladiator 2. He played the one that had syphilis. Yeah, this guy right here. There's a lot of things I really dislike about Gladiator 2, and his performance was definitely one of them. I just don't think he's a very good actor, and I think Kraven the Hunter is a true testament to that. Maybe he's just being typecasted as the same bizarre character, or maybe he's just taking strong inspiration from the character Arnie in the film What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And now cut to this scene right here. I'm sorry. Now, let's talk about the villains of this film, and this is where it gets really good. And by really good, I mean much, much worse. The character of the Rhino in this film is played by the guy who played Nicolas Cage's brother in the movie Face Off. I love that movie.
If I didn't love you so damn much, I'd have to kill you, bro. I hate it when you call me bro.
The human character of the Rhino in this film is one of the most boring characters throughout this movie, and the reason I say that is, I'm not quite sure what he does or what his purpose was or his position of power. He's sort of a generic bad guy who's a little bit nerdy, who has all these henchmen lingering around, but I'm not quite sure what the driving force is, other than the fact that he finds out one day that he's on Kraven's hit list, and when you're on Kraven's hit list, you can never be taken off of it. So what he does is he sets out to kill Kraven the Hunter. That's it. All right, let's talk about when he finally transforms into the Rhino. And I will say this. I feel like they were on the right track to having a live-action Rhino, because if you look at the comic books, that's kind of what he looks like in a weird way, except this incarnation of the Rhino looks like a CGI'd version from 2004 that wasn't quite finished being rendered, and they didn't really think it through. He also reminds me of Frankenstein from Van Helsing. And talking about the Rhino, the other mild positive I can give this movie is, unlike Amazing Spider-Man 2, where you see the Rhino for 2.1 seconds at the very end of the film, you actually see the Rhino doing Rhino shit for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, where he's going head to head with Kraven the Hunter. I almost forgot, there's a secondary villain in this film named the Foreigner, who has the power of quick reflexes, except they really never explain his power skill sets in this film. He's just manipulating things and doing things very quickly, and I wasn't quite sure on his motivation or his logic or who his character was, but he's in this movie, and the best way to describe him is, it's sort of like David from Schitt's Creek, except a supervillain. One of the largest detriments with this film, besides the cinematography, the direction, the acting, and the screenplay, is this movie is tone deaf. It doesn't know if it wants to be dramatic or funny or have quippy one-liners like a 1980s action movie. And there are so many scenes in this film that just feel like they were tacked in after the fact because they came from the mind of some talentless executive producer who said, this comic book movie needs more quippy one-liners. You can tell when they went back in and did some of the reshoots for this film where they added some of those terrible quippy one-liners from Kraven the Hunter, they also needed to change some of their dialogue, and rather than reshoot that sequence, they just added some really bad CGI to the characters' mouths and did some ADR on top of it, which doesn't even sound like it belongs in the same scene. And listen, if that only happened a few times throughout the course of this movie, okay, I understand. But no, it happens every other scene and it becomes almost distracting. Alright, so now here are my final flicking thoughts on Kraven the Hunter. The best way to describe Kraven the Hunter in the Sonyverse of comic book movies is, if this was a sandwich, Madam Web would be one piece of bread, Morbius would be another piece of bread, and Kraven the Hunter would be a piece of rotted meat right in the middle. Except I will say this about Kraven the Hunter, and it's the only positive I think I can squeak out in this review. This movie's unintentionally hilarious at times, and if you go in with that mindset, or maybe turn this movie into a drinking game at some point, every time Kraven gives a quippy one-liner that's not funny and doesn't work for the scene that it's in, and it feels so out of place, maybe take a shot. And by the end of the movie, you'll probably die of alcohol poisoning, or at least maybe that would be the best outcome after watching this movie. I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of characters in this film, but none of them are likable. There's no sense of humanity, and you don't really care about anyone in this film because they don't feel like real people or real characters with any depth or substance. They're just cliches of cliches on top of comic book tropes, on top of other comic book tropes that you've already seen for the past 20 years, except this movie came out in 2024, which originally should have come out in 2023, but because it was so terrible, they delayed it time and time again, and then interjected some reshoots in there, and this movie is just a mess. And as far as these modern day Sony comic book movies go, with every new comic book movie they crapped out for the last 6 or 7 years, they almost progressively gotten worse and worse and worse. Except I would say Kraven the Hunter is better than Madam Web. I would honestly say it's a better movie than Madam Web. Yeah. But that's not saying much. So I'm going to give Kraven the Hunter this right here. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely craving some more caffeine after this video. As always, guys, leave your thoughts, your opinions down below if you've seen this film, and I recommend that you do not, but if you have, let me know what you think about it down below. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. That way I can see you next time, and hopefully next time we talk about a better movie.